Welcome to episode 4 of the Journey to Handmade podcast. I'm so glad you're here with me today. This is my podcast where I talk about my adventure of making a handmade wardrobe and a handcrafted home for myself and for my family. And I share my adventures, my wins, my fails, and all the lessons I'm learning along the way. So I'm so glad you're here with me today. I am so excited because for the month of January, I had a goal in mind that if I could complete one garment, a quilt, and the quilt could be of varying sizes or degrees. I have a lot of unfinished quilt projects. A gift for someone, and a item for my home of some sort, something I've been interested in but haven't yet gotten around to making. If I would be able to make one of each of those 4 things every month this year, it would get me well on my way to having a handmade wardrobe and a handcrafted home. So I set that goal for myself with the understanding that it would be difficult and I may or may not be able to accomplish my hopes for each month, but I thought it would be worth it to try, and at least it would give me a bit of a direction. Especially when I sit down to create, my time is pretty small a lot of times because I'm working during nap time or in the odd hours of the day when I have some margin to create. And so I thought, when I go to use my creating time, if I spend that time trying to decide what to create, I can get derailed really quickly and end up not doing anything. So I work well having some guidelines and parameters for my free time that I know are working towards bigger goals that I have, but without being very, they're not very strict and rigid. I can flex them because I made them up myself. So my goal for January was to make one of each of those 4 things, and I'm so excited to share that I have 4 finished projects, one from each of those things, plus a bonus project that I was not anticipating getting around to doing, but I was inspired and found the time to do that as well. So I'm excited to share with you my projects. So for my garment, I surprised myself. I actually finished a garment that I had scheduled for March, and my garment I thought I would get done in January ended up getting totally ripped out, and so I'm going to make that my February project. Maybe my March project. I'm a little frustrated with it, but we'll get to that later. So I have to share with you my project piece shawl, and I am so excited about this. I had showed it to you in the last episode. I had it finished, but I hadn't blocked it yet. And I had shared that I've not wet blocked something since high school when it went terribly awry and my garment grew and then it ceased to fit me, and it was a very upsetting experience, to say the least. And I had some very sweet words of encouragement and decided to do wet blocking. So I have finished my project piece shawl officially, and look how pretty it is. The blocking just made it look so perfect. I love the way the lace looks now that it's wet blocked, and it's the Malabrigo Silky Merino, and it is so soft, and just, it turned out so wonderfully well. And I decided to treat myself. See, it looks, that's my elbow. I really like the way that this looks. So something like that. I would probably pull the lace out over here. It doesn't work quite well because I've got a cowl neck on here, but that's okay. So something along those lines. But I treated myself. I had, my friend Debbie had sent me a yarn and spinning package years ago. And when she did, there were some fiber soak packages in it. They're called Soak Modern Care for Fine Fibers. And I have held on to them all these years because I didn't want to use them up and then not have them anymore. And so there's different scents. And I used one of them to soak my fibers this week. I did a really giant bath full of water and soaked a number of projects all at once. And it was so nice because for once my fibers smell really, really nice now that I've blocked them. So I was really excited about that. When I did my one time of wet blocking before in high school, that was one of my great sadnesses as well, was that the sweater I blocked started to smell like sheep where it hadn't before. And I'm not opposed to the smell, but I didn't really want to smell like a musty sheep. And the scent, I'm very sensitive to fragrances, but the scent of this was light enough that it didn't affect me or make me feel funny, but it's strong enough that I don't smell animal or sheep. It just smells nice. So that's really great. So Debbie, if you're watching this, thank you years later once again for that soak. So that was my Project Peace shawl by Christina Campbell in the Malabrigo Silky Merino, which I would definitely recommend. If you're knitting a shawl, I think it's fantastic. Even a cardigan would be so pretty. Maybe a less variegated one in my taste for a cardigan, but very nice. So that was my garment that I finished. And then for my item, I decided I wanted some project bags because, as you know, if you've been watching my podcast or reading my blog, I did not have a project bag of any sort. I had just been using tote bags and brown paper bags and all of that. And so once I learned about project bags, I thought, well, gee, wouldn't that be fantastic? So I made myself 2 project bags this month. So that's actually 2 items. But again, it was that Riley Blake free cosmetic bag pattern, and I just love how they turned out. So I've got my 2 project bags. They count for the month of January, even though I've shown them as finished projects already this month. And then my next one is a little something that I made for my mom. So this is my gift item. Mom, if you happen to be watching, just close your eyes. But this is something special that I made for her. It's for her birthday, which was a number of months ago. So I am behind. But I think I'm almost done with my gifts that are too late for their due date. And then I'll be just to making gifts or trying to get ahead on handmade gifts. But I wanted to make her a mug rug. So you can see I just did a really simple little 4-inch quilt block here, and then added on, oops, wrong side, added on 2 borders, a skinny little blue one and a white one. It's all using scrap fabric that I already had in my stash from other projects. And then I'll show you up close. I free motion quilted it. And what was special is this is the first time I free motion quilted trying to follow a pattern that I traced on myself. So I just took a fabric marker, one that steams off, and I doodled what I thought might look nice. And when I had it the way I wanted it, I stitched over it. And you can see it's not perfect. There's some places where my stitching went off of the white and onto the blue. So, you know, I've still got some learning space, but I was excited to finish it, and I think it's a very sweet little mug rug. My mom's always had her eye on them and thought they were really cute, but as far as I know, she's not yet gotten around to making herself one. So this is going to be for her belated birthday present. So I get to give that to her this weekend, which is quite exciting for me. And then my last thing was my quilt project, and this quilt project was a simple one. It's called the 4 Bees pattern, and it's by Sandy Smith from the Red Rooster Quilt Shop in Dublin, Ohio. If you do happen to be in Dublin, Ohio anytime ever, or near it, the Red Rooster Quilt Shop is fantastic. I love going there when I'm nearby visiting my parents. So this is a really simple, it's hard to get back far enough. Here we go. It's just a small little baby blanket, and I love it because it is pretty simple to sew up. You can see I just zigzag stitched even over, got a loose thread I need to take off of there, but just zigzag stitched over, and it's for my cousin, and she had twins, so there's actually 2 of these, and I like it. This one is normal fabrics here, and then it's flannel up here and then around on the back. So you can see the backing is just nice and simple as well. But I think they make really nice gifts, and it's the perfect size. You can, you can snuggle a little one up in it, and it's a good blankie size too. So when they get bigger as toddlers, it's still a nice blankie that they can use and carry around. And and all that. So it doubles as a gift item, I suppose, but I counted it as my quilt item. I suppose I could have flipped the baby blanket and the mug rug as far as gift and quilting project, but both of them have been on my to-do list for quite a while, and I am thrilled that they are now finished and off, and I can get the blankets in the mail and the mug rug to my mom this weekend, and then I think I'm just about caught up on gifts for other people. So anyway, I'm very excited for January that my plan worked. It definitely kept me accountable. It gave me motivation when I wasn't certain what to do. It gave me direction. I knew, oh, I finished this, so these are the things that are left that I prioritized. And it felt good. So I'm going to give that another go in February. And I started the year kind of plotting out the whole year in advance. And what I realized is I'd rather take it month by month. And at the start of each month, assess how am I feeling, what am I interested in this month, and then based off of those, give myself 4 projects for the month to work on. And again, that was a garment, a gift, an item for the home, and a quilt. So those are my 4. I did think putting socks on would be fun as well, but I know that's more than I'm able to handle at this moment. So yeah, very excited about that. I'm still working out my February projects, so that's okay. And then I had one project, my bonus project, that I didn't think I would get to work on, was actually a spinning project. And here you go. It is an undyed alpaca, and it's from the Blazing Star Ranch. And I ended up spinning it. It seems to be a DK weight. It's rather rustic. It is by certainly no means a perfectly smooth yarn, but I'm new to spinning. This is I think it's my 3rd spinning project, but my first in years, and I really love how it turned out. I like the texture. Sometimes I found spinning I felt pretty good with. Plying I actually found was rather difficult, taking my 2 and bringing them together. There's some places where it's nice and even, and I feel like it looks more like a traditional yarn. And then there's other places where it starts to look a bit more like a boucle or a spiral yarn, where it's really not as even. But I still like it. So I ended up with 138 yards, and I only used half of my wool so far. So I have another 2 ounces of alpaca that I'm going to be spinning up here, hopefully in the next 2 weeks. And I don't have a project in mind, so I need to find something on Ravelry that would be suitable. I do tend to itch when I wear alpaca as a shawl, so I'm hoping I could find maybe some sort of a cardigan pattern or something, but the yardage is pretty small, so I think I calculated by the end I'm only going to have like 200, what was it? I think it was 270 something yards. So it's not very much, but I do really like it. I think it turned out really pretty, and it went into my soak along with my piece shawl, so it also smells really nice. And it did bloom out some, and I'm just so pleased. It was so much fun. So I was originally thinking I would use this fiber as one of my natural dyeing projects, and I actually really love the undyed cream color. So I'm on the fence if I'm going to dye this or if I'm going to leave it as is. It may come down to whether or not I find a project that I'm dying to make with it before I'm all ready to start natural dyeing this spring. So we'll see, but I'm very excited about how this turned out. And it's so soft, it's squishy. Yes, it's lovely. So there was that. And I only have, well, this one's finished, but it is a bit of a working project because my other skein of it is still to be spun. And then I have one work in progress still, and it is my light ease sweater. And if you follow me on my Instagram, I think is where I shared, maybe my blog too, my light ease sweater by Alicia Plummer has not been going so well. So I actually finished the body. I think it was this last weekend I finished it. And it looked a bit big to me, but that was okay. And so I picked up my sleeves and I started working on my sleeves. And then I realized those sleeves were way too fat. They didn't look like sleeves of garments that I typically wear. So I tried it on, and the weight of the yarn and the way it drapes, I think, just fell and made it a lot longer than it measured up when I laid it flat. And then it became quite a bit wider. And when I started my project, I was meeting gauge, but I had to work really hard to keep it tight enough. And I think I loosened up as I knit because I got more confident with working with the fiber. But the problem is when I try different needle sizes, I keep getting the same gauge no matter what needle I work with. And I went down to like a size 1. It calls for a size 6 needle, a US size 6. And so I thought that was really strange. So I settled on a size 5, which is a little smaller than called for. And I think my gauge is still just too big. So what I'm doing is I ripped it out, and you can see now, here's where I'm at. I left my cowl neck on. I did add the cowl and the drawstring. And so I kept those because they turned out great and I didn't have a problem with them. And then what I did is I put it on and I marked where I needed to frog back to and where I needed the new color change to be. The color change was just riding a bit low on my bust, and I wasn't comfortable wearing it that way. Plus, the sleeves are too big and too long. So I think what I'm going to do tentatively is actually end up keeping my gauge as it is and knitting the size extra small instead of the size small. And from the calculations I was doing, that should get me the same finished size as what I'm looking for with my adjusted gauge. I did put it aside because I'm a little worried about my math and making sure that I did it properly and thought through this right, because it was really disheartening to rip out that much work. It was a really simple knit, but it's still frustrating to lose all of that work, especially when I was so close to being done and I thought this was going to be my finished garment for January. And I felt so proud of myself because then I actually would have had 2 finished garments, but that's okay. So I'm going to put it aside for a little bit, and then when I feel positive about it again and I'm ready to tackle it, then I will go back to working on that. So that is my one work in progress, and I may not pick it up for a little bit, just to see. So there is that. And I think that hits up just about everything I've been working on. One other project I did is I had a wool sweater, a cardigan that I had knit up out of Jaeger yarn years ago. It was actually my high school sweater that grew when I blocked it, and I never ended up wearing it. And I was so upset by that. And then a few years ago, I finally got up my bravery to frog it, and I had it all in balls, and I went to knit it a few times, and when I would knit, my stitches weren't coming out even, and my knitting just didn't look pretty because the yarn was so zigzaggy and swivelly from being knit up before. So what I did is I figured while I was going to soak my project piece shawl and my alpaca, then I may as well soak my wool again. So I used my Nitty Naughty and I wound all of my yarn back up into skeins and I tied them and I soaked them as well and hung them up to dry, and it worked so well, so well. They aren't as perfectly straight and smooth as I recall them being when I knit it years and years ago, but I'm very confident now that I'm going to be able to knit up a cardigan with this yarn again, and this time it will lay flat and smooth because the fibers have all been straightened out from their soaking. And So I do feel really good about that. So it's kind of a little mini project as part of a bigger one. So that worked out really well too. So I think that is all of my works and works in progresses, which means I get to share with you my discoveries. So the last 2 weeks, I have been looking up a lot about sheep breeds, but I'm not quite ready to share about them yet, except that I'm a bit obsessed at the moment with Wensleydale, and I have some Wensleydale fiber in my stash, so I'm very excited. I'm going to try spinning that next, I think, after I finish my alpaca. And I heard it said on a podcast that Wensleydale is like iron strong. It's known to be one of the strongest fibers, and it's also supposed to be super lustrous and silky. And mine does not look that way at the moment, but I'm hoping that's just because it's been processed, and maybe as I soak it and everything, it'll fluff up. I'm hoping. So that'll be coming. But what I did get really into was looking up natural dyes. And last week I mentioned that my typical way to research is to go to the library, rent every book I can possibly find on the subject, and then leaf through them, peruse them, and see which books serve my purpose best, and then go from there. And so I had promised you that I would be doing that, and that I would let you know, in case you're interested in natural dyeing, which books are, in my opinion, the best go-to books for natural dyeing. So I'm going to share some of those with you now. So I think I'm going to start with my favorite. It's a good way to go. So my favorite book ended up being Wild Color, and it's by Jenny Dean. And I wasn't initially certain that I would like it. But the reason this was my favorite was because while she starts off with some history, and then she gives some basics to dyeing techniques. And I think that's great. Equipment, and, they all pretty much cover the basics. But what she does that I thought was really exceptional and helpful for me was she gives you the dye plants, and then she shows you what colors you can get out of those plants and how to get them. So, for example, birch, which I happen to have in my yard. So this will be going on this spring for sure. So she shows you, here are the colors you can get from the leaves. And the symbols coordinate with if you're using a mordant, what kind of mordant, if you're using during, before, after. And then here's what you get from the bark of a birch tree. And I think I want to try the bark, but maybe the leaves. Maybe the bark. I'm very excited about this. So she goes through just a whole bunch of different plants. And they, from what I could tell, they are from all over the world. But a lot of them were plants. I'm in the Midwest. And a lot of them were plants that I've either seen here or know I could get and I could grow inside. For example, here's like Coreopsis. This is a really popular plant near me. And so again, here's the colors you can get from the flowers, and then down here's from the plant tops if you put the whole top in. And I love that you can see so visually the difference between, here's your two mordants. I believe this is an alum and this is an iron, and how it turns it from yellow to purple. And yet, if you use just the flowers with nothing else, you're going to end up with this sunny yellow. And I have found it fascinating. So I've been going through this, and here's carrots or Queen Anne's lace. And she gives you how to grow it, how to harvest it, what parts you need to harvest. The only thing, and how long to do the dye, and if you should do a hot dye bath or a cold bath. And of course, she's giving you a beginning formula, and then it's up to you to experiment, and you can go off on your own and do it more or less or differently. But for a person who's new to dyeing, I thought this was great. It gives you an idea of what you can expect, but it's just so inspiring to see all of the colors. So my only critique of this book is that she doesn't often, hardly ever, give amounts of the dye material to the fiber, to the water that you're using. And I know that's part of the experimenting, but I would like a bit more of a formula and a bit less open-ended, I suppose. So that would be my one critique of this. However, a lot of the other books do include that information. So if I were purchasing, I would definitely buy this one as a good reference for, I mean, just look at all these colors. They're just, oh, sorry. It's hard to do it into the camera. I mean, just all of the different colors. You can see there's a whole rainbow represented, and then a lot of information at the beginning. So that's definitely my number one book. Another book that I really liked, and I like this one for a very different reason, is called Natural Color, and it's by Sasha Duer. I hope I'm saying her name right, Duer. And this book stood out to me first and foremost because she's got the most beautiful photographs going on in her pictures. I mean, just really lovely. But she starts her book and she's very almost poetic in how she describes why she likes natural dyeing and what the benefits are for the environment and how the process can work. And if you're on the fence about if you want to do natural dyes or acid dyes, or even if you want to dye, just reading her introduction and her starting, it struck a chord with me. It was really lovely to read. And so I found myself very inspired. And then what she does is she talks about seasonal dyeing. And so she goes through each season. So for example, here's spring. And then she gives you dye projects to do with that season. And so, like, here's her spring palette, and these are all dyes that she's been able to get at springtime. Now, she is in California, so I have heard that if you're using natural dye plants in your region's dye palette for the seasons will be different than other regions. However, I think it's probably still about the same. And then just look at these photographs. Here's her dye plants for the springtime that she uses. And then she gives you these projects. So here's an avocado pit pillowcase project, and every one of these has been dyed with avocado pits. And what I like about it is then she gives you the formula. She tells you exactly how much dye matter you need. She gives you exactly how much fiber you need in there. She tells you exactly how you're going to do it. She walks you through. It's like reading a recipe. And some of her ideas were just very neat ideas that I hadn't considered before, and I'm not sure I would have come up with them before. Like the pillowcases, for example, even though that's a very simple example. But then she has even placeholders that she does, placemats that she does. And she has a shower curtain and some clothing, and it's just really pretty, and it's so much really tangible information. You can see how a project comes full through it, and I like her approach of having a project to do your dyeing towards. So you're not just randomly throwing lots of different things in a dye pot and then at the end coming out with all of this product and nothing to do with it, because that's how I tend to work. And so even with spinning, I'm finding that's like with my alpaca here, that's my problem, is that now I need to find a project. And I think if you flip it, and this book got me thinking, if you've got a project in mind and then you go through the steps of how you want to get there, it seems like a very fulfilling way to use natural dyes. And again, then in the back, she gives you a bunch of ideas for how to make your own mordants and modifiers, and her focus is very eco-friendly. So she's constantly telling you how you can dispose of dyes and how you need to store different dyes and safety precautions, and I appreciate that angle. So her methodology combined with Wild Color by Jenny Dean's inspiration for colors you can get, I think the two of them go together really well. So those are probably my top two favorite books. Some others though, there's this one, Harvesting Color by Rebecca Burgess, and she is really interesting. There's the Making Podcast has a podcast episode where they interview her, and she is all about fiber sheds and doing all of your fibers and dyeing from a certain radius. It's very interesting. And what I liked about this book is she gives you some ideas, and again, it has the information and whatnot. But what's cool is she gives you the plant, and then she shows you, here's a dye result you can get with it. And then here's the regions where you can find that plant naturally. And so if you're not sure about what plants are local to you, then this book would be very nice, because you can see, for example, black walnut. If I'm interested in dyeing with a black walnut, well, if I look at the map over here, Illinois, it is in my region, I could expect to see it. If you're in Seattle, it is in your region, you could expect to see it. Michigan, if I'm in the middle of Montana, it might not be so likely to find it. So I found that was helpful. And she does talk about how to harvest it. And she does give you a recipe with ratio. For example, 6 pounds of walnuts to 5 ounces of fiber. And she tells you how much to do and everything. My question for her is, she does give you her formulas, and then she shows you the colors. But see here, there's 2 different colors, right? For the trembling aspen. And I'm just wondering, after seeing the variety of colors that you can get from one plant, like that, when you are given just one formula, the piece that I think is missing is how you get your outcome to look a specific way, or more likely to be a specific way. So I don't know that there's an answer to that, but that might make this, perhaps this would also be a good candidate to go with this wild color book, because this would tell you what mordants and modifiers to add to these plants and these recipes, which give you the amounts and the regions, but not necessarily, they might say that a fiber can get you, see, mountain mahogany, for example, will get you this tan color. Maybe there's a mordant or a modifier that would change that. And of course, I think the whole point of natural dyeing is you experiment and you learn. But again, if you're like me, I don't have a lot of money to end up with something I find truly hideous. And there's some colors I know I'm not interested in. So if, like, for example, okay, let's use St. John's wort as an example, because there's a lot of colors on it. So if I'm dyeing yarn, and let's say I'm looking for a pink or a purple, I know I'm going to be happier with those results. If I end up with that, I'm going to be very disappointed in my dye results. Now, I understand my pink or purple will depend on my specific variety and the water and the type of year we're having, if we're in a drought, if we're being flooded, how fresh the leaves are. It's going to be affected by a lot of different variables. Even the region, some dyers have shown their fibers that are dyed with the same material but harvested in different places, and even that can cause a difference. But this is something really special, I think. So maybe wild color with harvesting color would be a good combo if you're looking to buy books, or wild color with natural color if you're wanting more of a project ideas to go with it. Although this also has project ideas in it. Okay, so then the last 2 books that I have, actually I have a couple upstairs, but I really didn't like them. That's okay. The Modern Natural Dyer. This one is by Christine Vijar, and it also has really pretty photographs. You can see, like here, it's really pretty to look at. This to me looks like a pretty coffee table book. So it's definitely more visual. So here's a page on indigo, here's a page on logwood. But when I'm reading through the information, it gives you some basic information, but it's not as in-depth as what I would like to know. So they do give you projects, which I think is neat, and then they do tell you they give you some formulas. Like here, for example, is protein fibers. Here's wool and here's silk, and here's how much to use of different extracts. And so they're showing you, if you use, here's madder, an eighth of a teaspoon versus a quarter teaspoon versus 1 teaspoon. That information to me, though, seems like information I could get from here, with the understanding that the more dye material you add to your dye bath, then the more color you're going to get. That's kind of my takeaway. But they do have some neat projects. And so again, if you're looking, kind of like that natural color book, if you're looking for a neat project, or you're looking, here's another, there's a shawl, and she tells you exactly how to go through it and do it. So definitely worth looking at, for sure. But I think, again, for me, if you don't have a lot of money and you know that you're looking to dye things intentionally and use what you end up with, these two books, Natural Color and Modern Natural Dyer, give you some good project ideas. But I think these two books, Harvesting Color and Wild Color, give you the most know-how so that you're equipped to kind of get a jump start in your experimenting, and maybe not start from square one, but start from square 2 or 3, depending on how thoroughly you read them. And then the last book I have is Yarn Works: How to Spin, Dye, and Knit Your Own Yarn, and it's by W.J. Johnson. And it, again, is also, I believe, more project-based. So it gives you good background information, and this one I think is probably most interesting if you're looking for how do I buy fiber, spin the fiber, and then dye it to what I'm looking for. But what's different about this one is it's kind of giving you an overview of every piece. So it's giving you an overview on spinning, an overview on dyeing, and an overview on knitting. And the dyeing part includes natural and synthetic dyes. So if you're wanting to do acid dyes, it gives you a little more information about what you might want to look at in regards to that. If you are like me and you're looking more for natural dyes, it gives you some very basic information, but compared to these other books on the subject, it's nowhere near as thorough. So there is that. So that is my preliminary look into natural dyes. I think when I'm happy to use the library system. I think that works great for me. But again, I really would probably purchase these two books if you're going to buy any on natural dyeing, and then rent these two books as ways to get information and be inspired, and maybe get a project or two. But I think these are longer lasting starting places to then begin a dye exploration. So that's my 2 cents. That's where I think I'm going to take it. And my final thought for today that I wanted to share is, after all of this research and all of these explorations, one of the things that I realized that was shocking to me is how many of these dye materials are available in my region. And a number of them I already have growing in our yard. And we live in the suburbs, so we're not in an agricultural area, really. We aren't, I don't have tons and tons of land. But what I realized is, with some careful planning, I can create space in my yard for a few more of these dye plants so that I have them to dye with this spring, summer, and fall. So one of my February projects is going to be making a list then of what dye plants I can fit in the yard and where, so that I can begin to acquire them. And some are simple, like roses. We don't have any growing in our yard right now, but I know they're easy to get and they grow very well here. And so I think what I'm going to do is, my game plan is, I want to approach natural dyeing from the start with the dyes I can get just from my own yard. And there are some special plants that I want to begin growing so that I can do that. And for example, I think indigo should grow well for me, but I think I might do it as a container plant so I can bring it in the fall. So I'm still looking into some of those basic things. But ways that I can go about growing the plants that I'm going to dye with. And then what's cool about that is if you have a garden, then one of Sasha's recommendations for your dye bath when you're completed it and you've extinguished, you've used all the dye out of it and all the color, is then you can use your leftover dye bath as water for your garden, and it continues the cycle. So I thought that was very lovely. I'm not willing to use the dye water in my vegetable garden, but if I have dye plants around the yard that are not in my vegetable beds, then those would be places that I could pour the dye water, and I think that's a really neat idea. So I hope you have a wonderful couple of weeks and that you are inspired and have some ideas that you've taken away from our time together today. And if you have any questions about natural dyeing, I am not an expert, but I am an enthusiastic learner and I'm getting going with that. And so feel free to drop me a line and I can look more into whatever your question is, or if you have ideas or information that you think would be helpful to me on my quest, same thing. So you can find me, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel for sure, and then you can find me on Ravelry and Instagram and Facebook as Journey to Handmade, and my blog, of course, where I share more information about this journey is www.journeytohandmade.com. So it was so great to join you today. Bye.